G'day, and thanks for joining the Woodworking Masterclass today. I'm Steve, and welcome to my workshop. In the coming weeks, we're going to turn a pile of rough-sawn timber into this beautiful period-style side table, complete with dovetail drawers and 4 hand-matched Cabriole legs. And along the way, I'll be sharing many tips, tricks and techniques that I've learnt, developed and used for over 30 years as a professional woodworker and fine furniture maker. Along the way, we'll be making some very useful and handy jigs that can be used not only with this project, but any other projects you should undertake in your woodworking adventures. The reason I chose this particular project is because it has a lot of traditional techniques involved with it. Even though a lot can be done with machines and power tools, it still requires a lot of hand tool usage, which creates a wonderful opportunity to learn new skills or hone the ones you already have. And when broken down into small manageable parts, as we'll do, it will be even within the reach of the most novice of woodworkers, and yet at the same time challenging for those with more experience. So if you'd like to join me now, we'll waste no more time and we'll start on the project. Okay, when I start building a piece of furniture, it starts out in book form. I just doodle on a pad until I get a design that I feel is worthy of being built. I then move on to a full sheet of MDF and build or draw the piece I want to build in full size. That allows me to get ratios and balance and get a pleasing effect. And I've found over time it's a lot easier to rub a line out and draw a new one than have to make a new leg or a new drawer because it doesn't quite suit the design. Once this is done, I take all my measurements from this board. Now, as far as sourcing timber, a lot of people nowadays buy their timber pre-dressed, or called DAR, which stands for dressed all round. The advantage, of course, with dressed timber is it's flat. You can see the figure, you can see the grain, and it's nice and square. Unfortunately, it does have its limitations. I much prefer using rough-sawn timber. The disadvantage is obvious straight away. You can't see what the grain or the board is going to look like. But the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. For example, rough-sawn timber is generally cheaper than dressed timber. Also, it makes more species available for you because timber yards carry a lot more in rough sawn. The thing I like as well is timber today, or the furniture today, is generally built in 19mm or 3/4 inch, whereas antiques and furniture of yesteryear were built in 7/8 or 22mm. So if I've got a rough sawn board at 25, I then have the option to either machine it down to 3/4 inch or 19mm or 22mm. Another great advantage is if you, in storing your timber, should drop anything on it, it gets stained, it gets wet, or it gets bruised. By the time you've machined it down to the right size, all those blemishes would disappear. With dressed timber, that's your finished size. And if you get any blemishes or stains on it, you're stuck with them for life, or you've got to use another piece of timber. But when you're buying rough-sawn timber, don't assume that it is square and flat, because in most cases it's not. And we have to machine the timber. Now, the first part of machining the timber is to give us a flat surface that we can run through a thicknesser. Now, if you're like me and many other woodworkers, you have a thicknesser and a jointer, but the jointer isn't as wide as the thicknesser, we have a problem. Because if your board is wider than your jointer table, you can't do it on the jointer. Well, you can, if you saw it up the middle and then machine it separately and glue it back together. But frankly, it doesn't look professional in a finished job. So the other way is to flatten it by hand. And that's what we're going to do. Work out if it's cupped, twisted, warped or bent, and then flatten one surface so we can put it through the thicknesser. But before we do that, let's make our first workshop aid. And it's a very simple one. It's called a bench hook. Very easy to make, very easy to use, but very, very useful. All you need is a piece of scrap timber, plywood preferably. I found this bit in my throw-out bin. It's cut square, roughly A4 size. Another thing I have a lot of in my workshop is 2x1 pine. Now, the length of this Generally you can pick up for under $2, but make sure you get a nice straight piece and clear, so there's no knots or pith in it. That way you can use it for a lot of purposes. Cut some lengths to the width of your pine, 2 lengths, so you end up with 2 pieces like that. Another thing I have and use a lot in the workshop is 30mm Gyproc screws. I don't use them for making furniture, but they're ideal for just holding things down. All we'll do, square your 2B1 up to the pine, the ply, and then 3 screws. In fact, 2 screws are most likely to do. Hook that bit over your bench and repeat the process with the other piece. And there you have it, your first workshop aid, a bench hook, and we'll be using it later on. Now, back to flattening timber. Before we can flatten timber, we of course have to work out if it needs to be flattened. And how do we do that? We use what we call winding sticks. And if you don't have any winding sticks, that's okay, we'll make a couple right now. Get your bench hook you just made, get that pine again, get a saw, and cut roughly a 300mm length. Now go to the table saw or bandsaw and you split that up the middle. What I do is mark top on 2 pieces with arrows pointing to the join that's going to happen when you resaw it. And then you end up with 2 winding sticks. How we use these winding sticks? Get your board, the arrows pointing the same way, and you sight down the board. And as you can see, this stick is slightly higher than this stick, which means we've got a twist in the board. That's what we've got to get out. Now how I flatten a board and get the twists out is I use 3 different hand planes. There's a scrub plane, a converted number 4, and a shooting plane. If you look at the blade on the scrub plane, you can see it's very, very severe and it removes a lot of stock. The converted number 4 has got a convex blade that I ground myself. It's not as savage as the scrub plane, but it still removes a lot of stock. And then a normal number 7 shooting plane. So we know where the high spot is. I'll mark that with a pencil. And when we come back after the break, we'll put it in the vise and we'll flatten it. Okay, see you after the break. Welcome back. Just before the break, we made a bench hook, we made some winding sticks, we looked at some timber, and we decided we needed to straighten it. And I explained how to use winding sticks. Now, when we know where the twist is, we'll machine it out. By the way, if you ever use a vise and you find that your timber's slipping, use water. A couple of squirts of water works miracles. Thing is, people are scared about using water in timber, but when you think about it, that's how timber's grown. So it should be pretty used to it. Right, now first off, I use a scrub plane and I hit the high spots. When I think I've just about got it, I'll put the winding sticks back on and sight down. Just a little bit more to go there. It's the advantage of having that extra fatness with rough sawing, you can take a bit out. Okay, that's nice and flat. So what I do now is go down the entire board using the scrub plane. and back again. Might give it one more. Now that's given me a very severe checkerboard pattern. To flatten that out a bit more, I'll use what I call the hogging plane, which is converted number 4. Same process on the diagonal and then back again. That should be nearly good enough to put in the thicknesser, but I prefer to go over to make sure it's as smooth as I can get it. That's why I use a joining plane. And you'll notice, to start with, I'm not taking much off. That's because the plane is riding over the ridges. But as we work down, the shavings get stronger and stronger. By the way, if you ever wanted to join a gym, buy a couple of hand planes and give yourself a workout, half an hour a day. Best aerobics you can have. That now is straight enough and flat enough to go into the jointer. The thicknesser. I'll go and put it through right now. Okay, as you can see, that board now is parallel with each other, both faces. But now we've got to get an edge at 90 degrees to the two faces. And how you do that, once again, is putting it in the vise and using a jointing plane. If you've got a jointer, that's fine, but you'll still need to use a shooting plane to remove the jointing marks. Before we do that, let's just have a look at the grain. It's very important that you can read grain. If you look here, you can see the grain is going uphill. And it's very much like stroking a cat. If you stroke a cat from the head to the tail, cat's happy, it's nice and smooth. Go from the tail to the head, cat's not happy, and no one has a good time. So we've got to plane what they call uphill. And that's true when you're using your jointer. Because the blades are running this way, it has to lay the grain down. Your thicknesser, same thing. Only the blade's on the top, so it has to lay the grain down. So we'll put that in a vise, and we'll shoot a nice square edge. Something I find invaluable in the workshop, bit of candle grease. Works wonders. Now when you start to plane, you'll notice I'm only taking a little bit off the board. The reason for that is because the board isn't straight to start with. If I'm using a number 4 plane and the board's wobbly, that's how the plane's going to do. It'll follow its contours. So I won't get that crisp, nice, sharp, straight edge I'm looking for. But with a jointing plane, it crosses all the hills and valleys and it'll give us a straight edge. Another thing, people plane, they use their arms a lot. That wears you out. I like having my body fairly central to the board that I'm planing and use my body, get that out a bit, my body weight to propel the plane, except for the last little bit where I move my arms. You might find too, when you're planing, you have a tendency to roll the plane. I'm left-handed, so I roll the plane towards me, which means this side is generally higher than this side. If you're right-handed, the opposite is generally true. So how I compensate for that is I put my fingers under the sole of the plane, thumb down on the knob, grab hold of the tote, point the finger, and I take a very small shaving off the high edge. If you can see that, I'm not doing the full width of the board, but that's taking the high spot off. As I do continuing shaves, eventually I get nice wide shavings. Then I know the board's flat. We'll check it with a square. And that's nice and true. All right, once we've shot a board, we've got it flat, we've got it square. Unfortunately nowadays, we don't have the luxury we used to of being able to get wide boards. Now the top of this side table is nearly 300 mil, and it's hard to get boards that wide, so we have to join them. There are many methods on the market today of joining boards, but I prefer the traditional one, which is called a sprung joint. Now a sprung joint, when laid two pieces of timber side by side, puts pressure on the ends. I don't know if you've ever seen a table that's been in the weather, it's got splits on the ends. It's a good chance that it wasn't done with a sprung joint. It was either a butt joint or was doweled together. Because wood, even though the tree is dead, is still living. When it's wet, it expands. When it's dry, it contracts. That's how we get splits. But after the break, I'll show you how to do a sprung joint and explain why I believe it's the superior joint to have in furniture anyway. See you after the break. Welcome back. Just before the break, we'd shot some boards, dressed them, and now we're going to join a couple. And we were talking about sprung joints and how they work and why I feel they're the superior joint for furniture making. As I said before the break, timber moves. In the wet, it expands, and in the heat, it contracts. What happens in the majority of cases, when the timber shrinks, it draws into itself in that way. And in many cases, it's stronger than the glue, so it will break the glue line, and you'll start to get very small splits at the end of your joints. With a sprung joint, this is exaggerated, we plane an ellipse into the boards. And then when we clamp them together in glue up, we're applying extra pressure to bring these two surfaces together. And in doing so, we compress the ends of the boards. So when it's cool or when it's wet, the boards can expand, but when it's dry, instead of shrinking, there's enough compression on the joints to allow the joint to expand and take up the slack, and therefore we don't get any splits. So how we get a sprung joint is you generally, again, use a shooting plane. This is a number 7. I generally come in about 2 inches. Same as before, thumb on the knob, fingers underneath, grab hold of the tote. A normal plane for about the first couple of inches, and then I use my body weight to push down on the plane, and then before the last couple of inches, I release it. So if we were to look at a shaving, it would be thin, then thick, then thin again. And I'll do that 1 or 2 times on both boards. So I've just got a very narrow dip. When we join the boards together and hold them together, we should be able to see light through the middle, and that's what we're aiming for. If you have a problem planing square to start with, here's a little trick. Providing the grain's running the same way, remember we plane uphill, put the boards together, have the grains running in the same direction, and then put a mark so you know where the boards go. Join them together, and if you put them in the vise together, making sure they're even, that was a little bit high, so we might have to take a bit off of that. It doesn't matter now if you roll the plane right or left, because whatever you do will be compensated. If I lean this way, this means the outside board is going to be narrower than the top one, which will be higher. But when they come together, the compensation will allow them to join nice and smoothly. Now when we clamp that up, it's going to join nicely. So we might do that right now. I use hide glue. There are a lot of other glues on the market, but hide glue seems to work for me. They've been using it for thousands of years. And the thing I like about hide glue is I can undo my mistakes, and believe me, I make a lot of them. Whereas a lot of the other glues nowadays, once it's glued together, that's it, you're stuck with it. Just put these up. We've got a sprung joint in, and this will be the top of our table. That's the other thing. I don't believe you can ever use too much glue. I've seen jobs come apart because people haven't put enough glue on it. It just means maybe a little extra cleanup with glue squeeze out. Thing with hide glue too is you don't have as much pressure as you do say with PVAs or epoxies, because hide glue actually glues upon itself, and therefore you have to have it not squeezed all the way out, or you'll get a very weak joint. With hide glue, I generally leave it overnight before I machine it or clean it up. And there you have it. No messing around lining slots up or lining holes. It's so easy. Now that's how we've done the top. Now we've got to do the sides of the carcass. That's slightly different because, as you can see, they're narrower pieces of wood. I don't so much worry about doing a sprung joint on these because not much moisture can escape, because we've got the top on this side and we've got a rail on this side. So I just get 2 bits of timber, I've shot them straight, and I join them together like that, which is a butt joint. As I say on all the great cooking shows, here's one I cooked earlier. This has been joined just with a butt joint, and you'll notice it's a lot wider than this. The reason for that is I'll get both pieces out of the one side. It gives me continuity with the timber, and when it comes to machining, it's much easier to machine if it's a bit wider. Now, plane a straight edge, mark that as your face edge. Get a square. Find my glasses. Just mark off a line as close to the edge, and we have to plane that flat. Now, as I said before, larger planes really are a bit cumbersome in this area. So what I use is a block plane. Now, the difference between a block plane and a bench plane basically is the bevel is up, and on the bench plane the bevel's down. And it's also got a removable mouth or a movable mouth, so you can take very fine shavings. So we put this in the vise and we plane down to that line. But if you've ever planed end grain before, you've noticed you'll get tear out on the ends. Trick with the block plane or any end grain planing, put a little mitre on the end of the board. That's why I always make my pieces oversized until I've got the exact measurement. And then plane it down to the line so it's square. And also square this way. Then mark off the width you need, cut down and repeat the process. So that's taking care of the sides of the carcass and the top of our table. Next week we'll be going on to building the carcass itself using Dovetail constructions, and the tools we'll be using will be chisels, saws, coping saws, Japanese saws, marking gauges, and a lot of other jigs and workshop aids, which I'll be looking forward to sharing with you next week. Really hope you've enjoyed this part. So it's Steve pulling the shed door down for another week and saying, remember to keep it sharp, but more importantly, keep it safe. Bye.
Seasons 1 and 2 of Woodworking Masterclass are now available on DVD. Call 31 Digital on 07 30 10 7331 or head over to the Woodworking Masterclass Facebook page to order. Grab a copy of Woodworking Masterclass on DVD and remember to keep it sharp, but more importantly, keep it safe and enjoy your woodwork.
G'day, I'm Steve and I look forward to welcoming you into my workshop for episode 2 of Woodworking Masterclass. In that episode, we'll be building the carcass to this magnificent period-style side table, and I'll share with you some tricks and techniques that I've learned about cutting dovetails, and also how to have fun with woodwork. So until then, I look forward to your company on Woodworking Masterclass.